My husband was cheating on me in our country house. He thought I'd never find out. But I switched the wine for something more interesting. After the first sip, through the branches of the pines, I watched the windows of our countryside home. My heart was pounding so hard it seemed its thumping echoed through the forest. Inside, in the living room with panoramic windows, my husband Michael and his blonde in a red dress were settled on the couch. On the table between them stood an open bottle of wine, Chateau Margaux 2010, the pride of Michael's collection. The very same bottle into which I had poured a triple dose of strong laxative 3 days earlier. The plan seemed perfect. I had carefully uncorked the bottle, poured in the medicine, stirred, sealed it with a new cork, and gently put the label back in place. I imagined how the two of them would dash back and forth between the couch and the bathroom, how their romantic evening would turn into farce. It would have been the perfect revenge for lies and betrayal. But what I saw unfolding inside the house did not match my expectations. Instead of clutching their stomachs and running to the restroom, Michael and his companion seemed to be choking. I saw the woman slide off the couch onto the floor, and Michael, trying to stand, collapse back down, his face twisted in pain. This didn't look like a laxative's effect. It looked like poisoning. Real, deadly poisoning. I didn't hesitate for a second. Bursting out of my hiding place, I rushed into the house. A horrifying scene met me inside. Michael convulsing on the floor, his lover unconscious, barely breathing. Grabbing my husband's phone, I called an ambulance and began administering first aid. The doctors arrived 15 minutes later. "Looks like methanol poisoning, industrial alcohol," the senior medic said after the initial examination. At the hospital, an investigation began. The toxicology report confirmed it. The wine contained a lethal amount of methanol as well as a heavy dose of laxative, but the methanol had been added later. But let's start from the beginning, and I will tell you how I uncovered my husband's infidelity and betrayal. I, Anna Walker, had always prided myself on my female intuition, though it would be more accurate to call it my ability to notice warning signs, a skill I had paid for dearly. Before Michael, there was Victor Cranston in my life. 3 years of a relationship that had begun beautifully and romantically at university. He studied chemistry, I studied law. Victor was intelligent, well-read, gifted with words about love and the future, but gradually those sweet words turned into psychological chains. At first they were caring requests. "Don't stay out late with your girlfriends, I worry. Why do you need to hang around those guys from your class? That skirt is too short. I don't want people looking at you like that. I thought it was love." I was 19. What did I know about relationships? Then care turned into control. Phone checks, demands for reports on every step, jealous outbursts over a passing glance at a stranger. Victor could be charming in public and cruel in private. He never raised a hand against me, but his words cut deeper than any blows. "Without me, you're nothing. Who would ever want you besides me? You're too stupid to make decisions on your own." I started to believe it. I lost friends who tried to open my eyes. I lost myself. It took me 2 years to realize this wasn't love, and another year to find the strength to leave. Victor didn't let go easily. He threatened suicide, then turned his threats on me. Months of stalking, endless phone calls, sudden appearances near my home or work. I was terrified, but I endured. And then Michael Walker appeared in my life. A student at the university's civil engineering department, calm, confident, but never aggressive. I knew his face. We sometimes crossed paths in the hallways, in the student cafeteria, at university events. Victor knew of Michael too, but they never interacted. Too different, with separate circles and interests. We actually met at a student party I attended alone. Victor had thrown yet another tantrum and forbidden me from going, but I defied him. Michael approached me himself, asked me to dance, later walked me back to my dorm. He didn't try to control my every move, didn't get jealous of classmates, didn't demand accounts of every minute I spent. With him, I felt I could finally breathe freely. Michael was Victor's complete opposite. Where Victor pressured and suppressed, Michael supported. Where Victor humiliated, Michael admired my intelligence and independence. Where Victor tried to isolate me, Michael introduced me to his friends and proudly showed me off as his girlfriend. 10 years of marriage. 10 years I thought I had finally found my home, my family, my happiness. 10 years I was grateful to fate that, after the nightmare with Victor, I had met a real man. But my past experience hadn't gone to waste. It had taught me to read people, to notice the slightest changes in behavior, to catch lies. Those skills saved me as a lawyer, helping me resolve family disputes for my clients, and those same skills allowed me to notice that something was wrong with Michael. And now his betrayal threatened to destroy even this world that had once seemed so solid. History was repeating itself, another man deceiving me, leaving me alone once more. Only now I was 35 and starting over felt impossible. So when Michael began acting strangely, I noticed it instantly, as if some inner alarm had gone off. It all began with little things. Details another woman might not have noticed, or might have written off as fatigue, work stress, or a midlife crisis. But I worked at one of the largest law firms in the capital, specializing in family law, and my analytical mind would never allow me to ignore evidence, no matter how small. The first warning sign was his sudden concern for his appearance. Michael, who used to wear the same shirt 3 days in a row, suddenly started changing it every morning. A new fragrance appeared, an expensive, sophisticated Tom Ford he had once dismissed as pretentious stuff for rich kids. When I asked about the change, he shrugged, got tired of the old one, wanted something new. New. That word became the key theme in our conversations. New restaurants he wanted to try, new movies he planned to see, new vacation spots, as if our entire old life no longer satisfied him. Then came the urgent business trips on weekends. Michael co-owned a construction company, Walker Build, with his brother Anthony. They specialized in building countryside cottages. There was always plenty of work, but before, Michael had managed to settle all important matters during weekdays. Now, every Saturday or Sunday, there was suddenly a critical project demanding his immediate attention. "You see, darling," he explained while tying his tie in front of the mirror, "clients are willing to pay extra for weekend work. And money is never a bad thing." I nodded and stayed silent. Extra money was indeed useful, but I knew the company's schedule. I knew all the major clients, and none of them had ever demanded weekend work with a bonus. The next alarm bell was the phone calls. Before, Michael had answered calls in front of me without a second thought, sometimes even putting them on speaker if they involved mutual acquaintances. Now he either declined them with a "I'll call back later," or stepped into another room. "Work stuff, darling," he'd say, returning from the balcony after a 10-minute call. Boring technical details. But his voice wasn't boring. It was pleased, even joyful, the way he used to sound after closing a big deal or receiving a bonus. I began keeping a silent diary of suspicions, not written down. I wasn't paranoid, but I mentally noted every oddity. His new habit of showering the moment he got home, switching to a pricier mobile plan with unlimited calls, a sudden interest in fitness. This man who had ignored my suggestions to work out for 10 years suddenly bought a gym membership. "I want to get in shape," he said, showing off a brand new sports bag. "I feel like I've gotten soft." Time to take care of my health. Health or attractiveness? And for whom? But most of all, I was unsettled by his trips to our country house. A beautiful 2-story cottage in a pine forest 50 kilometers from the capital had suddenly become a magnet for Michael. He used to complain that it was boring there, that he needed the city buzz, restaurants, cinemas, crowds. Nature's fine, he would say, but only in small doses. And now, every weekend, he found a reason to go there, to check the heating, to inspect the roof, to meet with neighbors about repairing the road. Once he even said he was going just to think in silence about new projects. Maybe I should come too, I suggested. I haven't been there in a while. No need, Michael replied quickly. It's a mess right now. I started some renovations. Better if we go together once I'm done. Renovations I knew nothing about. In the house we had bought together, furnished together. The last straw came one evening when Michael came home in high spirits, humming to himself. On his shirt, I noticed a long, light-colored hair. Not mine. My hair was dark and short. And not his. Michael's hair was dark and very short. Where did this come from? I asked, holding up the hair. Michael frowned at it as if seeing it for the first time. No idea. Maybe it stuck to me on the bus or something. A blonde on public transport, of course. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay beside my peacefully snoring husband, piecing together the puzzle of evidence. The picture that formed was clear and painful. Michael was cheating on me, most likely for months already, and their meeting place was our country house, the family nest we had built together, our escape from the city's chaos. By morning, I had made a decision. I had to be sure. I had to see it with my own eyes. I needed undeniable proof before confronting him. Over breakfast, Michael announced that on Saturday he was heading to the house again. I want to finally deal with that leak in the basement, he said, spreading jam on his toast. Every time it rains, there are puddles down there. I nodded and smiled. Of course, darling. Take care of it. But I already knew what I would be doing that Saturday. Saturday turned out cloudy, but without rain. Michael left around 12:30, as usual, saying he had to stop by the hardware store for repair supplies. I waited until his car disappeared around the corner. Then half an hour later, I set out too. I had carefully thought through the plan. Park the car in the woods about 300 meters from the house, approach on foot and observe from a distance. If my suspicions were confirmed, I would take photos or record a video. I needed evidence, not just for myself, but for the divorce that was now inevitable. The drive to the cottage settlement took an hour. I turned onto a forest road that Michael and I had discovered last year while mushroom picking and went deeper into the woods. I parked the car behind thick spruces where it couldn't be seen from the main road. It took me about 20 minutes on foot to reach the house. My heart was pounding so loudly it seemed it could be heard in the next county. I understood that in just a few minutes, my life might change forever. I might discover that 10 years of marriage had been a lie, that the man I trusted more than anyone in the world was capable of betrayal. Or maybe I was just paranoid, and Michael really was fixing the house. Reaching the edge of our property, I settled behind a large pine tree with a clear view of the windows. Michael's car was parked in its usual spot. Lights were on inside, even though the day was still bright. For the first hour, nothing happened. I began to think I'd been wrong, that he truly had come to deal with the leak. Maybe I should leave, stop suspecting him of every sin imaginable. But at 2:30, a silver Audi appeared on the driveway. Elegant, expensive, a car I'd never seen before. It parked next to Michael's, and a woman stepped out, a blonde, tall, slim, in a red dress and high heels. Shoulder-length hair, a beautiful figure, at least 10 years younger than me. She walked toward the house confidently, as if she had been there many times before. The door opened before she even had the chance to ring the bell. Michael stood in the doorway, in jeans and the shirt I had given him for his birthday last year. He embraced the blonde and kissed her. Not a friendly peck on the cheek, but passionately on the lips. I felt something inside me tear away and plunge into the abyss. Suspecting was one thing, seeing was another. My legs gave way, and clinging to the pine, I slid slowly down its trunk. Hot, silent tears streamed down my face. 10 years. 10 years I loved this man, built a future with him, dreamed of children we never managed to have. 10 years I was a loyal wife, supporting him through hard times, celebrating his successes. And he brought other women here, into our house, into our bed. I don't know how long I sat behind that pine tree, sobbing and trying to believe what I had just seen. I came to my senses at the sound of a door slamming. The blonde emerged from the house and headed toward her car. Now she was dressed in jeans and a white blouse. Apparently, she had changed inside. Michael walked her to the car, kissed her goodbye, and waved until she disappeared around the bend. Then he stood for a moment longer, staring after her, before returning inside. I got to my feet on trembling legs and stumbled back toward my car. On the way, I vomited. The stress had overwhelmed my body. For a long time, I clung to a tree, trying to steady myself. I drove home as if in a fog. Michael returned about an hour and a half after me, cheerful and relaxed. "How's the leak?" I asked, surprised that my voice sounded normal. "All fixed," he said, kissing me on the cheek. "Turned out it wasn't that bad. A little repair, and it'll be good as new." Good as new. As if our marriage could be good as new after what I'd discovered. That night, I didn't sleep again. I lay awake wondering what to do next. I could start a scandal right then. I could file for divorce. I could try to fight for my husband. Or I could take revenge. The next 2 weeks passed in agonizing anticipation. I acted as if nothing had changed. Cooked breakfast, asked about his work, discussed weekend plans. Michael behaved naturally, too, but now I noticed the details I used to miss. How he checked his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. How he hummed in the shower. He had never sung before. How carefully he styled his hair before trips to the country house. How he bought expensive flowers for the house, though he had once considered it a waste of money. Flowers. I almost laughed hysterically when he brought home another bouquet of roses. No doubt he bought them for her, for his blonde, and only brought them home out of guilt. In the second week, I hired a private investigator. My old university acquaintance, John, had opened his own agency after leaving the police force. We met at a cafe, and I explained the situation in as businesslike a tone as I could manage. "I need photos, videos, complete information about her," I said. "Name, age, workplace, marital status, how long this has been going on, where they meet besides the country house." John nodded, jotting notes in his notebook. "It'll take a week, 2 at most. My fee is $10,000 plus expenses." Agreed. I had the money. My good salary as a lawyer, plus bonuses, had allowed me to build personal savings Michael knew nothing about. I was suddenly grateful for that foresight. While the detective worked, I planned my revenge. Simply leaving Michael felt like too easy a punishment. He had to understand what betrayal meant. He had to feel the pain he had caused me. The idea came unexpectedly when I went down to the wine cellar in our city apartment to fetch a bottle for dinner. Michael was a serious wine enthusiast, collecting for 15 years. At the country house, there was a separate cellar with the best bottles in his collection. I knew my husband's habits well. Every time he went to the house with his lover, he would open a good bottle of wine. It was his unshakable tradition, a romantic dinner with wine. He especially loved Chateau Margaux 2010. A single bottle was worth over $10,000, and Michael had been saving it for a special occasion. And what could be more special than a date with his young mistress? The plan formed quickly. I would go to the house while Michael was away, find that bottle, and add something unpleasant. Not deadly, of course. I wasn't a killer. But something effective enough to ruin their romantic evening. A laxative. A powerful, fast-acting laxative. Let them try to keep the romance alive while their bodies turned inside out. I even smiled, imagining the scene, Michael and his blonde, writhing in pain. Instead of a passionate night, endless runs to the toilet and groans. Instead of tender confessions, curses, and accusations that one of them had eaten something bad. And afterward, when it was all over, I would show him the detective's photographs and file for divorce. Let him know his wife was aware of his escapades. Let him understand that he had driven me to such revenge. The results of the investigation arrived a week and a half later. John brought me a thick folder of photographs, printouts, and a report. The blonde's name was Catherine, 27 years old, an art director at the advertising agency Creative Group, unmarried, no children, living alone in a rented apartment downtown. Her affair with Michael had lasted 4 months, starting after a corporate event for the construction company where her agency had presented a new advertising campaign. They met not only at the country house, they went to restaurants, to the movies, even spent a weekend in Los Angeles last month. At the time, I thought my husband was away on a business trip. The photographs spoke for themselves. Michael and Catherine holding hands on the boulevard, their kiss by a fountain, leaving a hotel early in the morning. The hardest part was looking at Michael's face in those photos. He looked happy, truly happy, in a way he hadn't looked with me for a long time. "Looks like a serious relationship," John said. "Not just a fling. He's already introduced her to his friends. They're talking about a future together." A future together. So Michael was planning to leave me. Sooner or later, maybe he was already preparing the ground for divorce. That night, I made up my mind once and for all. Michael deserved a lesson, and I intended to teach him. On Monday, I took a half day off work and went shopping. First to a pharmacy. I studied the shelves of laxatives and chose the strongest one available without a prescription. The pharmacist warned me it was very powerful, that I had to strictly follow the dosage and never exceed the recommended amount. "It's for bowel cleansing before a medical procedure," I explained. The doctor prescribed it. The pharmacist nodded and sold me 3 packs. I thought, if 1 pack was enough to cleanse the system of a single adult, then 3 packs divided between 2 people should have a spectacular effect. My next stop was a wine accessories store. I bought corks, sealing wax replacement labels, and a corking tool. Everything needed for professional wine bottling. The sales consultant, an elderly man with a knowing look, explained the subtleties of the process. "The main thing is precision," he said, demonstrating how to set a cork properly. "And high-quality sealing wax. If you do everything right, no one will ever notice the bottle was opened." Perfect. Exactly what I needed. I returned home with bags full of supplies and a plan of action. All I had to do was wait for the right moment, when Michael was at work, to go to the country house. The chance came on Wednesday. Michael had an important meeting with potential investors that would last the entire day. He left in the morning, warning me he wouldn't be home before 8 in the evening. I waited until noon, then drove to the country house. On the way, I checked several times to make sure I had everything: the laxatives, the wine accessories. The house greeted me with silence and tidiness. Michael really did keep it in perfect order. In the living room, a vase of wilted roses stood on the table, leftovers, no doubt, from their last rendezvous. In the bedroom, a woman's magazine lay on the nightstand next to a cup with coffee dregs. I tried not to think about what had taken place in that bedroom. In our bedroom? In our bed. I forced myself to focus on the task. The wine cellar was in the basement. Michael was proud of that room. Special climate control, oak racks, soft lighting. It held the most valuable bottles of his collection. Finding the right one wasn't hard. Chateau Margaux 2010, a single bottle reserved for special occasions. Carefully, I took it down, studying the label. A beautiful bottle, an expensive wine. Soon it would not taste so fine. Opening it had to be done delicately, without damaging the label or leaving a trace. I used a professional wine knife I found in the cellar. The cork came out easily. The wine was still relatively young. The contents of all 3 packs of laxative dissolved into the wine almost without a trace. The liquid grew slightly cloudy, but in the dim light it was almost unnoticeable. I carefully swirled the bottle, mixing its contents. Inserting the new cork turned out to be trickier than I'd expected. I had to redo it several times before it looked professional. I melted the sealing wax in the kitchen microwave, then carefully applied it to the bottle's neck. The final touch was the label. I removed the old one with extreme caution to avoid damage and fixed the new one in exactly the same spot. The result looked perfect, as if the bottle had never been opened. I put it back in its place and scanned the cellar once more. Everything looked normal. No trace of my presence. Leaving the house, I felt a mix of satisfaction and unease. The plan was in motion. All that remained was to wait until Michael came back here with his lover and open the bottle for their romantic evening. At home, I behaved as usual. Cooked dinner, asked about his meeting with the investors, discussed weekend plans. Michael was in high spirits. The meeting had gone well, and a major contract was on the horizon. "By the way, I'll be heading to the house again on Saturday," he said over dessert. "I want to finally finish the bathroom renovation." Bathroom renovation. I wondered what kind of work he and Catherine were doing in there. "Of course, darling," I replied. "Don't rush. Do it properly." I even smiled. 2 days to go until Saturday. Saturday dragged on endlessly. I tried to busy myself with chores, reading, watching a film. Nothing worked. My thoughts kept circling back to the country house, where my revenge was about to unfold. Michael left at 1:30 as usual. That meant Catherine would arrive around 3. By 5 o'clock, they would open the wine. By 5:30, the laxative would take effect. I replayed the instructions in my mind. The effect should appear within 30 minutes to an hour after consumption. 3 packs split between 2 people was a serious overdose, but not lethal. At most, they'd face hours of discomfort and dehydration. By 4 o'clock, I could no longer sit still. I paced the apartment, glancing at the clock every few minutes. I pictured Michael ceremoniously taking out the expensive bottle, he and Catherine clinking glasses, sipping the wine, completely unaware of the surprise it contained. By 5:30, curiosity and anxiety overwhelmed me. I couldn't resist. I drove to the country house, not to intervene, just to watch from afar to make sure everything was going according to plan. I parked in the same spot in the woods as before and walked to the house. Michael's and Catherine's cars were there. Lights glowed inside. I took my place behind the familiar pine tree and began to watch. The living room's wide panoramic window gave me a perfect view. Michael and Catherine were sitting on the couch, chatting pleasantly. On the table before them stood the opened bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "It's begun," I thought with grim satisfaction. 20 minutes passed. Michael and Catherine kept drinking, still talking normally. I waited for the laxative to take hold. Another 30 minutes later, I realized something was wrong. Michael suddenly clutched his stomach and doubled over. Catherine looked just as bad, pale, her face twisted in pain. But this was not what I had expected. A laxative should have caused intestinal discomfort, diarrhea, maybe nausea. Not this. They were writhing in agony, clutching their throats, visibly nauseated. Michael tried to stand but collapsed back onto the couch. Catherine slid to the floor and lay motionless. Her face had turned bluish. Cold dread washed over me. This was not at all what I had planned. Laxatives couldn't cause these symptoms: loss of consciousness, convulsions, difficulty breathing. These were signs of serious poisoning. Michael fell to the floor too. He was struggling to breathe, his breath shallow and uneven. His hand trembled as he reached for the phone on the table, but he didn't have the strength to grab it. "Oh my God, what's happening?" I thought in horror. This looked like deadly poisoning, but I had only added a laxative. Where could poison have come from? Without another second's hesitation, I dashed out from behind the tree and ran to the house. Whatever my relationship with Michael, whatever revenge I had planned, I couldn't stand by and watch him die. The door was unlocked. I burst into the living room and saw the horror up close. Michael was lying on the floor, his body racked with convulsions. His face was pale as chalk, his lips bluish. Catherine was unconscious, her breathing barely detectable. I grabbed Michael's phone and called an ambulance describing the symptoms and the address. Then I rushed to my husband, trying to keep him conscious. Mike, hold on, the ambulance is on its way. Michael managed to open his eyes with effort. When he recognized me, he tried to say something, but only hoarse gasps came from his throat. Don't speak, I told him, stroking his forehead. It's going to be all right. The doctors are coming. In that moment, a chilling realization gripped me. Someone else had added something to that wine, something deadly. If I hadn't come, if I hadn't seen through the window what was happening, they both would have died. My thirst for revenge had inadvertently saved their lives. The ambulance siren was audible within 15 minutes. I met the paramedics at the door and led them into the living room. The scene spoke for itself. Severe poisoning, every minute critical. What did they take? The senior doctor asked quickly as he set up an IV. They drank wine, I answered, an expensive French wine from my husband's collection. The symptoms point to poisoning by methanol or a powerful toxin, the medic stated. It's good you found them quickly. Another half hour, and it would have been too late. Michael and Catherine were quickly loaded into ambulances. I followed close behind, not letting their cars out of sight. One thought spun in my head. Who wanted them dead? And why today, of all days, on the very day I decided to add laxative? At the hospital, chaos erupted. Resuscitation, intensive care, doctors conferring. I sat in the corridor watching as they fought to save my husband and his mistress. How absurd. I had wanted to punish Michael, to ruin his evening, and now he might die. Catherine, too, which meant I might become a murderer by accident. Except, wait, I had only added a laxative. That couldn't cause these symptoms, which meant someone else had slipped in something far worse. But who? And why? I tried to recall everyone with access to the house. Only 3 people had keys, me, Michael, and his brother Anthony. No one else. Could it have been Anthony? But why would he kill his own brother? They shared a business and had always gotten along, though lately I had noticed they spoke less, and Anthony had seemed tense. 3 hours later, a doctor emerged from the ER. A young man with a tired face. Your husband and the woman are out of danger, he said. We made it in time. But the poisoning was very severe. A massive weight slid from my shoulders. What happened to them? What were they poisoned with? From the symptoms and preliminary blood tests, methanol, industrial alcohol, very toxic. In large doses, it's deadly. A few more hours and we wouldn't have been able to save them. Methanol? I'd heard of it. Sometimes counterfeit alcohol contained it, but how could it be in an expensive French wine? Where could they have consumed it? I asked. I don't know. Michael said they drank wine. It might have been counterfeit, or someone deliberately added methanol to the bottle. We'll have to call the police. This may be attempted murder. Police. An investigation. And in that wine, they would also find laxative. How would I explain that? I sank into a chair in the corridor, struggling to gather my thoughts. Someone had wanted Michael dead, or Catherine, or both. But who? And why now? I pulled out my phone and called my brother-in-law. Anthony, where are you? We're in trouble. Mike is in the hospital. He's been poisoned." "What?" Anthony's voice sounded genuinely shocked and frightened. "Where? How? What happened?" "At the country house. The doctors say methanol. He's in the hospital now." "I'm on my way. Which hospital?" Anthony arrived 40 minutes later. He looked truly shaken, terrified even. He demanded details, cursed the doctors for being slow, hugged me, and tried to comfort me. If he was involved in the poisoning, he was playing the role flawlessly. But I knew Anthony well. He was never a good actor. His emotions looked absolutely sincere. So it wasn't him. But then who? The police arrived an hour after Anthony. 2 investigators, a middle-aged man with sharp, piercing eyes and a young woman in a strict suit. They introduced themselves as Major Robinson and Captain Parker. The first thing they did was question me. "Who else has access to the house?" Major Robinson asked. "Only my husband, his brother Anthony, and me," I replied. "No one else?" "No, we're very careful with the keys." The investigators exchanged glances and jotted something down. "We'll head to the scene to examine it," Captain Parker said. "We may have more questions later." After they left, I remained at the hospital with Anthony. By then, Michael had regained consciousness. Though he was very weak, speaking was difficult for him. Catherine was still in intensive care. "Anne," Michael whispered when he saw me, "forgive me." I took his hand. "This wasn't the time for reproaches. Don't say such things. What matters is that you're alive." "I don't understand what happened. We drank wine, an expensive bottle from my collection, and suddenly we were sick. Don't think about that now. Just rest." Anthony sat nearby holding his brother's hand. His face showed genuine worry. The next day, Michael was moved to a regular ward. Catherine also regained consciousness, though she couldn't yet speak. Her throat was raw from the stomach pumping. The investigators came back to the hospital. They had news. "We tested the wine you drank," Major Robinson said. "It did indeed contain methanol. The concentration was very high. Lethal." I nodded, trying to look shocked. "But that's not all," he continued. "The wine also contained a large amount of laxative." My heart skipped a beat. That was it. The uncomfortable questions would begin. "Who could have added these substances to the wine?" Captain Parker asked, her eyes scanning us closely. I decided to act preemptively. Better to admit part of the truth than get caught in a lie. "I added the laxative," I said quietly. All eyes turned to me. Michael lifted himself slightly on the bed. Anthony's mouth fell open in shock. "Why?" Major Robinson demanded sternly. I took a deep breath. I knew about his affair. I'd known for a while. I wanted to teach him a lesson, to give him and his mistress a very unpleasant evening. I never meant to kill anyone. Laxative isn't poison. Michael closed his eyes and groaned. Anthony shook his head. "Do you realize your actions could have worsened the poisoning?" Captain Parker asked. "Methanol in combination with other substances becomes even more dangerous." "I understand. I was a fool. But the methanol wasn't me. I don't even know what it looks like or where to get it." The investigators exchanged glances. "We tend to believe you," said Major Robinson. "The analysis shows the laxative was added earlier than the methanol." "Someone else tampered with the bottle after you did." "But who?" Anthony asked. "That's what we're trying to find out. Do you have any enemies? Anyone who might wish you harm?" Michael slowly shook his head. "I don't know. In business, there are always competitors, but to go as far as murder—" "What about financial problems? Debts?" "No, business is fine. Right, Anthony?" I noticed Anthony hesitated for a split second before answering. "Yes, of course. Everything's fine." But something in his tone made me suspicious. On the 3rd day, Michael was discharged. Catherine remained in the hospital, but the doctors said she was out of danger. I took my husband back to our city apartment. We drove in silence. There was too much to discuss, but both of us knew this wasn't the time. At home, Michael went straight to bed. The poisoning had left him very weak. I prepared a light dinner, then sat by the window with a cup of coffee. Over the past few days, I had thought a lot about what had happened. Someone had wanted to kill Michael or Catherine, but who and why? And why exactly on the very day I chose to add a laxative? Could it have been a coincidence? Maybe the would-be killer had planned the poisoning long ago, and my sabotage just overlapped with his plan. Or maybe the opposite. Maybe someone knew about my intentions and used the situation to their advantage. But how could anyone have known? I recalled my purchases at the pharmacy and the wine accessories shop. Could those purchases have exposed my plan somehow? Unlikely. I had paid in cash, never gave my name. Then the keys. Apart from me, Michael, and Anthony, no one had access to the house. Michael certainly hadn't poisoned himself, which meant Anthony. But why would Anthony kill his own brother? They shared a business. They had always been close. The next day, Investigator Robinson called. "We have new information. Can you come to the station and bring your brother-in-law with you?" An hour later, Michael, Anthony, and I were sitting in Robinson's office. Michael still looked weak but insisted on coming. "Anthony Walker," Robinson began, "your situation is interesting." Anthony tensed. "We found your fingerprints on the wine bottle. And we also reviewed your financial activity over the past 6 months," the investigator continued. "A very curious picture. Large debts, overdue loans, claims from banks and private investors." "So it was you, my brother," Michael growled, clenching his fists. "But why? Was it about money? You're in trouble financially? Why didn't you tell me? We're partners." "Because it's all your fault," Anthony exploded. "You and your so-called brilliant ideas drove us to bankruptcy. We're drowning in debt, and you don't even notice." "What are you talking about?" "Business is fine. Profits are growing." "No," Anthony shouted. "Business is a disaster. That profit is just numbers on paper. There's no real money. We owe the banks $20 million, private investors another $15. In a month, we'll be declared bankrupt." I stared at this scene in shock. Did that mean Michael truly hadn't known about the company's problems? "But why didn't you tell me?" Michael asked, bewildered. "Because you wouldn't have understood anyway. You live in your own world, thinking only of yourself and your pleasures." Anthony looked at his brother with hatred. "Do you know how hard I work while you're off playing with your mistresses? Do you know how I've been trying to save our business while you waste money on restaurants and gifts for blondes?" Michael went even paler. "Anthony, I didn't know." "Didn't know? Of course you didn't know. You never had time to know." The investigator listened intently. "Anthony Walker," Robinson said calmly, "and you decided that if your brother died, the company would be yours alone?" Anthony fell silent, staring at the floor. "Answer the question," Robinson demanded sternly. "I didn't want to kill him," Anthony muttered. "Honestly. I thought I could make him sick enough to be unable to work for a few weeks. During that time, I hoped to negotiate with creditors, find new investors." "Methanol, Anthony!" Michael shouted. "Do you understand you could have killed us?" "I didn't know it was methanol," Anthony protested. "I was told it would only make you ill for a while." "Who told you?" The investigator cut in sharply. Anthony hesitated, then said quietly, "An acquaintance. He promised to help. Said there's a substance that mimics symptoms of a serious illness but isn't life-threatening." "Name." "Full name," Robinson ordered. Victor Cranston. We studied together at university. He's a chemist, works at a factory. Sometimes we meet, have drinks. I told him about the money problems and he offered to help. I felt the blood drain from my face. Victor, my ex, the very man I had run from years ago, the man I still feared. Robinson noticed my reaction. "You know this man?" "Yes," I answered hoarsely. He's my ex," I said. "We broke up many years ago back in university. It was a very painful breakup." Major Robinson studied me carefully. "Tell us more." Victor couldn't accept it. He stalked me for a long time, threatened me. I even filed a police report, but eventually he seemed to calm down. I thought he'd forgotten. "So he had a motive for revenge," Robinson concluded. Then he turned to Anthony. "Your acquaintance gave you industrial alcohol, one of the most dangerous poisons. If it hadn't been for the fast medical response, you would now be a murderer, twice over." Anthony covered his face with his hands. He said it was safe, that it would just make him ill for a while. "Cranston is a trained chemist," Robinson said. "He knew perfectly well he was handing you poison. He used you to get to your sister-in-law." "But why?" Anthony couldn't understand. "What does Anna have to do with this?" "Because I left him for your brother back in university," I said quietly. "We all studied there together. Victor in chemistry, Michael in civil engineering, me in law, and Cranston never forgave it." Anthony remembered their student meetups, how Victor always asked about his brother, his work, his family. Anthony had thought it was just friendly curiosity, but in truth, Victor had been gathering information for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. Anthony buried his face in his hands. I was only thinking about money, about saving the company. And in the end, you nearly killed your brother and an innocent woman." Anthony was arrested right there in Robinson's office. Victor Cranston was detained the same day at the chemical plant. During a search of his home, investigators found an entire folder of photographs, taken secretly over many years. Pictures of me and Michael at restaurants, at the theater, outside the country house. He had been watching me all that time, unable to let go. "I didn't want to kill Michael," Cranston insisted during interrogation. "I wanted him to suffer. I wanted Anna to see who he really was. I wanted her to come back to me." "You gave Anthony a lethal dose of methanol," the investigator said flatly. "I thought he'd dilute it, that he wouldn't use it all at once." A lie. Cranston was a chemist. He knew exactly what would happen. In court, expert analysis proved the amount of methanol was enough to kill 4 adults. Victor Cranston received 15 years of hard labor as the organizer of attempted murder. Anthony was sentenced to 8 years, suspended. I attended the sentencing. As they led Cranston away, he turned to me. "I still love you, Anna. I'll be waiting." I didn't respond. His eyes carried the same possessive gleam they had 10 years earlier. Cranston hadn't changed. He felt no remorse. He still saw me as his property. Michael was devastated, not only by his brother's betrayal, but also by the realization that the whole ordeal had been orchestrated by someone from my past, someone he remembered from university, who had nearly killed us all over an old grudge. "How did I not see it?" Michael said to me on the drive home from court. "I remember him from university. I remember the way he looked at us when we started dating. I remember his stunts, the way he treated you. If only I'd paid more attention to our family instead of everything else. Maybe none of this would have happened." "No, Mike." Cranston would have found a way anyway, sooner or later. And I knew I was telling the truth. Victor could never let me go. Leaving him for Michael had simply given his hatred a clear target, and he had patiently waited for the chance to strike. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. I kept the country house and Michael got the apartment. Michael tried to rebuild his relationship with Catherine, but it failed. She could never forget that horrible day when she nearly died. Every time she looked at Michael, she remembered the hospital, the ICU, the fear of death. "I know it's not your fault," she told him during their last meeting, "but I can't. I'm sorry." Michael was left alone. He found a job as a foreman in another construction company. His salary was far less than what he had earned as a business owner, but it was enough for a modest life. Anthony received 8 years on probation. The court took into account his remorse and the fact that there had been no direct intent to kill. The brothers never spoke again. I moved into the country house. At first, it was hard to be there. Too many memories. In the living room, where I had found Michael and Catherine on the brink of death. In the wine cellar, where I had tampered with the bottle. In the bedroom, where my husband had betrayed me with another woman. But gradually, the house began to feel different. I rearranged the furniture, repainted the walls. I turned the wine cellar into a home office. At the law firm, they allowed me to work remotely. I was a valuable employee, and the management didn't want to lose me. The neighbors in the cottage settlement turned out to be pleasant people. An elderly couple from across the street, William Peterson and Grace Jones, often came over for tea. I helped them with legal matters. They shared gardening tips and stories about the community. "Did you know there was once a poisoning in your house?" Grace asked me once over tea. "I know," I smiled. "That was my ex-husband." "Oh, I'm so sorry," the neighbor blurted out, embarrassed. "I didn't think—" "It's all right. That's in the past." Work occupied most of my time. Family law is a demanding field, requiring not just legal expertise, but also psychological insight. I witnessed many families breaking apart, cheating spouses, children caught as hostages in parental conflicts. My own experience helped me understand clients better. I devoted my free time to the house and garden. In the spring, I planted apple and pear trees, laid out a flower bed, started a small vegetable patch. Physical work in the soil calmed me, gave me a sense of creation, of growth, of renewal. Sometimes I thought about what had happened a year earlier, about my thirst for revenge that had nearly ended in tragedy, about how thin the line is between justice and vengeance, between punishment and crime. It was a good thing I had limited myself to laxatives. A good thing it wasn't me who added the methanol. But what if, in a fit of rage, I had chosen something more radical? What if I had procured poison myself and mixed it into the wine? Then I would be in prison now, and Michael in the grave. That thought always made me shudder. I realized that when I'm hurt, I'm capable of much more than I ever imagined, and that knowledge sobered me, forced me to be more cautious with my own emotions.